one more story for you guys. This is Chris Hedges. Interesting conversation here. So we did cover Julian Assange day one. This is basically a recap of actually what happened at the hearing for day two. Now, Chris Hedges actually was able to go inside of the hearing. So a lot of the people that I saw so far were outside of the building, but apparently Chris was able to go into the hearing itself. And so I want you to hear what Chris said in reference to the Julian Assange hearing. Let's go ahead and bring this up. Again, this was after day two.
Rolling. Chris, you were present in the courtroom. Any general thoughts or impressions today?
Yes, I would caution against being too sanguine about the attitude of the judges, although of course Craig is right. I covered the trial of Chelsea Manning, and the judge was not only respectful, but I would even at certain points describe as motherly, and then knifed Chelsea in the back. So the demeanor is interesting, but it may not be significant. I think we do have to remember that in the afternoon they kept hammering the defense about the failure to adequately redact and put people's lives in danger. This is the canard that the U.S. uses as a big bludgeon to go after Julian, although, of course, even they have had to admit that they have no evidence that anybody was actually harmed.
Let me just pause here for a second. So Chris Hedges is speaking about the judge. Now, if you saw the interview I had with Scott Ritter, one of the things that Scott Ritter said that he was concerned about was the judge, right? So Chris is actually saying, like, maybe not be so focused on the demeanor of the judge. Sometimes the judge can seem, kind of cranky, and you think that they're definitely going to rule against someone like Julian, but sometimes it can go the other way, like he said in reference to Chelsea Manning. So they have different opinions in reference to the judge. But if you didn't see that interview I did with Scott Ritter, go check that out. And Scott Ritter goes a little bit deeper about what he thinks is going to happen. But here we go.
But they asked that question several times. I think the most interesting aspect for me, again, occurred in the afternoon, and that I think was the correct focus by the defense on Vault 7, because he's not charged. Vault 7 was the leaking, what was it, 2017, Craig?
Yes.
Yeah, to the leaking of the CIA hacking tools, their ability to use our smartphones, even our cars, internet, TV, anything, even when they're off, to monitor us. And that really triggered the fiercest animus against Julian. That's when Mike Pompeo, shortly after that, he was then the head of the CIA under the Trump administration, attacked WikiLeaks and Julian as what hostile, non-state intelligence agencies. I may have that slightly garbled. And then you really saw an acceleration towards the extradition, which the Obama administration had not pushed for, what they call the New York Times problem, because, of course, what Julian and WikiLeaks did was no different from what The Guardian, El País, Le Monde, Der Spiegel all did in terms of publishing. They published this in a kind of joint project. And I think that was an important point, because although he's not charged for the release of the publication of the information in Vault 7, it's very clear that the engine of the extradition, the forces that are pushing for his extradition, come out of the CIA, and that if he is extradited and ends up in the Eastern District Court of Virginia, which is a kind of bastion of CIA, it's very close to the CIA, and the jury pool is all pulled from people who have relatives, friends, connections to the CIA and other national security agencies that are all headquartered in that area. And that's why the government wants it there, because they win those cases. I don't see, and see what Joe and others think, Craig, I don't see how they're not going to hit him with these charges. And potentially, at that point, and I think that the defense was correct in raising, not only would these charges exacerbate, though he's facing 175 years already, but then it really becomes, the potential of even the death penalty becomes possible. So that was, I thought, the most interesting aspect that I saw this afternoon. Yeah.
So when we're thinking about what could happen to Julian Assange, remember what we don't want to happen is for him to be extradited from the UK to the United States, because it would be game over for him if he were to come here to the US. We all know they would sentence him to prison, probably life in prison, God knows, and he probably would not live to be able to tell that story. But what should happen is for Julian Assange to be sent back to Australia. He needs to be freed. Like this is wild and crazy. And I think about people like Mumia. I think about people like Daniel Hale. I mean, I think about like all of these political prisoners like Leonard Peltier. It's just insane that these people have been in prison for so long. And it's just like all because they dared to stand up to the government, to the deep state, right? So but Julian Assange's situation is unique in the sense that he was a publisher, and it's like you can't do your job as a publisher or as a journalist and tell the truth. So you're only allowed to repeat the State Department narrative in order to keep your position and not have the threat of being, thrown into prison. And for what? Because he revealed U.S. war crimes? He wasn't the first one. Think about the Pentagon Papers. Think about Seymour Hersh. Why do we know of Seymour Hersh? Because of the war in Vietnam, because he revealed that the U.S. soldiers were committing war crimes against the civilians in Vietnam and against children. But for whatever reason, when it comes to Julian, he was not given a pass. So it's not like this has not been done before. It has been done before. But I feel like they're trying to make an example out of Julian Assange. That's what I feel is happening here. We'll go on a little bit more here in reference to the hearing.
And of course, they gave the alleged whistleblower
40 years.
years.
Yeah, 40 years. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And also, one of the expert witnesses, Maureen Baird, she did point out, after a question on re-examination by Mark Summers in the extradition hearing, that it is the CIA that if the charges are not aggregated to death penalty, they can make it as actually worse than death by imposing Sabs anytime they like. And I think Mark Summers really pointed that out today.
And we should explain what SAMs are. So
Special administrative measures.
And I've watched them at work because they were used after 9/11 when the American government, at the behest of the Israelis, shut down all of the Palestinian activists and all of the major Palestinian organizations like the Holy Land Foundation. These people are still sitting in jail. So I covered the case of Fahad Hashmi, and he was put in isolation in the MCU in New York for 23 months. And now Fahad his crime was that he was smart and articulate and had been a leader of the Palestinian movement. At his trial, they actually played surreptitious tapes or recordings that they had of him speaking about Palestine at the university to convict him. He was doing a graduate degree, I think, at the University of London School of Economics, and his roommate had sent waterproof socks, I didn't even know such things existed, to the Taliban or Al-Qaeda or something, and had borrowed his cell phone. I mean, it was just really flimsy. But the point is, when they brought him into court, he was a zombie. He didn't know where he was. They had broken him, and they know how to break you scientifically. And of course, they're applying these psychological torture to Julian.
Yes, they are. And for those who were wondering, Julian Assange was not able to be present at the hearing because he was too sick to make it to the hearing. His health has been declining, and it's because of obviously like the way that they are treating him in prison. And of course, that's intentional. Solitary confinement, in my opinion, is ultimately cruel. I think that it just drives you crazy. obviously you're going to have some mental issues there. Like if you're just put into a hole, oftentimes no light of day. I don't think solitary confinement should actually be allowed in any country, right? Because I feel like it's inhumane. That's not rehabilitation, in my opinion. But that's why he wasn't actually able to be at the hearing. So we'll play a little bit more of this, and we'll have to see what happens when they make the ruling. So let's not, I don't want us to get too excited or hopeful, but I also don't want us to be too, doom and gloom either. We really don't know what is going to happen until we hear that ruling.
And so these SAMs are very pernicious. They isolate you, they restrict your ability to see the quote-unquote evidence used against you. Even your lawyers can't see it. It's extremely difficult for you even to have contact with family members. It's complete social isolation. But just to throw that out, that in the diplomatic note, which has no legal validity really, they said they won't impose SAMs on Julian. This is part of the assurances. They won't impose SAMs on Julian unless, of course, he warrants them, so they can. But it's important that we have other SAM-like measures, MCUs, management control units, that really replicate. I mean, one of the things they said in the diplomatic note is he won't go to Florence, Colorado, this high-tech supermax prison pre-trial, without saying that nobody goes to Florence pre-trial. So it's really cynical. But they have lots of ways to break you. And I also teach in the prison system and have for 14 years through Rutgers University and the college degrees. So I kind of see it up close. And even there, on a smaller scale, they'll pull my students for minor, like having a cell phone, which was sold to them by the guard, of course, and throwing them in for a year, and they come out. They say after 6 days they start to lose it, but having taught students that come out even after a year in isolation, they don't ever fully recover. So it's important to know that they have all sorts of mechanisms within the bureaus of prison that are designed to destroy you.
And to break you. Yeah. And that's what they've been doing to him. At one point, he wasn't even allowed to socialize with people at all. I interviewed his brother and his father. It was about 10 months ago. I interviewed them about this, and they talked about, when they finally allowed Julian Assange to be able to socialize with other prisoners. Like it's wild and crazy. And we'll have to stay tuned to see what happens with the hearing. But I did want you to hear that tidbit from Chris Hedges because he was actually able to be inside of it.